Okay, I'm going to take a look at the poem Written Near a Port on a Dark Evening by Charlotte Smith. As ever, we've got in yellow some of the key kind of language points to look at, and in blue some of the structural elements of the poem that you may wish to comment on in your essay. So first thing to note perhaps is that this is a sonnet, and as such it is divided into an octave, the first 8 lines here, and then a sestet, the remaining 6. Perhaps worth reading a little bit about sonnets and sort of finding out perhaps why Charlotte Smith chose to write in this particular format. Traditionally, of course, they are love poems, and so we might consider, is something being celebrated here? Is her sort of admiration perhaps for nature being expressed? That sort of thing. So it's written near a port on a dark evening, so immediately we know that this is going to be about a seascape, and of course the first line confirms that as we discover that huge vapours brood above the cliffed shore. And worth mentioning here that this word "huge" it ties in with a romantic concept and romantic. So we're talking here about 18th century poetry, in particular, dealt with quite often with the sublime, and this really is the idea that nature, in its sort of grandeur, especially sort of huge, large-scale, natural sort of objects, can inspire feelings of awe and wonder and even fear, perhaps in the viewer. So, for instance, one of the most famous romantic poets, William Wordsworth, talks in one of his poems about the powerful effect of seeing a sort of mountain rising up before him. And here, Charlotte Smith talks about these huge vapours, so emphasising the size of these clouds as they brood, so sort of sit heavily, if you like, above the shoreline. And then in the second line, she moves on to moves away from the sort of the image of the sky and towards the actual sort of surface of the ocean itself, and the way that night settles onto the ocean. And you'll note here that I've highlighted night in blue just because I think the word order is quite interesting. She's sort of really putting night at the forefront of this image and creating this sort of first image of darkness, and it sort of settles onto the ocean, implying a kind of calmness, I suppose, tranquility as well. And it is dark and mute, so suggesting this idea that the night is silent. But then Smith immediately qualifies that and says it's not entirely silent because, as she says, save where is heard the repercussive roar of drowsy billows on the rugged foot of rocks remote. Now, hopefully, as you hear me read that, you can hear some of the sort of the sound effects that she's creating here with her word choices. The repercussive roar. So this sort of loud, repetitive sound, which I think we can all probably imagine, of waves sort of crashing into rocks. And note here she calls the billows or the waves drowsy, and this example of personification perhaps reflects her own sort of drowsiness as she listens to this repeated sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. But equally, we have that a slightly sort of contrasting sense with the R sounds, the repercussive roar, the rugged foot of rocks remote, quite sort of harsh, tough sounding language here, creating again perhaps this idea of the sublime, these sort of huge, like, natural features of the landscape. And so she's talked about those, but then moving on, she hears another sound. So again, we're sort of gradually getting this image being created, where she's commented, or rather sort of first evoked the kind of the visual side of it, and then she's talked about the sound, the repercussive roar. And now another sound sort of comes in, a still more distant tone. So, we can almost imagine the poet here sort of listening out, and these sounds coming to her across the water. The still more distant tone of seamen in the anchored bark. So the anchored bark, so that's simply a small ship, anchored. Obviously it's sitting still on the water with the anchor down, that tell the watch relieved. So the idea is that she imagined being able to hear the sound of the crew on a boat, perhaps one of them being told that his turn on the watch is over, so relieved. And then, or she imagines another voice, or one deep voice alone, singing the hour and bidding strike the bell. And I believe that traditionally on ships, every hour someone would strike the bell to sort of to let people know the time. And so then we get a shift in focus. As we move between the octave and the sestet, and this is called, if you've seen some of the other videos, you'll know this, a volta. It's a sort of the turning point, if you like, in the poem. And here Smith moves again away from the kind of the sounds that she's experiencing, back to the sort of the visuals. And here she says, "All is black shadow, but the lucid line marked by the light surf on the level sand." And this is interesting. I emphasised or highlighted all and but, because I just wanted to be clear about what precisely she's saying. So initially she seems to say that everything is black shadow, and even this is noteworthy and perhaps worthy of comment, because if all is black shadow, that doesn't quite work. Like, the idea of a shadow sort of implies the kind of the interplay of light and darkness. So it can't all be black shadow. And indeed, she then says, "but the lucid line," and that word "but" here in this context essentially means except. Okay, so she's saying all is black shadow except, but the lucid line marked by the light surf on the level sand. And so here she's creating the image of the shoreline and the point at which the water and sand meet, and she calls it a lucid line. So this idea of sort of clarity and light as the water, the light surf meets the level sand. And again, it's quite a sort of placid, gentle image, and we've got this repeated alliteration of the L sound, and it creates an image of sort of beauty, gentleness, clarity, I think. The lucid line, light surf, level sand. Level sand, again, perhaps, suggesting the kind of not just the beauty of nature, but a calmness, a tranquility. It's level, it's flat. And then she moves on to slightly sort of perhaps tricky to understand idea. She says, "Or where afar the ship lights faintly shine like wandering fairy fires that oft on land misled the pilgrim." So here she imagines that the lights on boats out at sea are fairy fires. Now, this idea is a sort of one from kind of folk tales, I suppose, and immediately brings in this idea of deception, I suppose, because as she looks at these lights on the boat, she by comparing them to wandering fairy fires, she's sort of evoking the sense that they might be attempting to sort of lead people astray, or to mislead them. And we could read into this. Smith might be using this as a metaphor for the idea that that sort of sin or evil can lead people astray, can sort of put temptation in front of people. But equally, think about the time when Smith was writing this poem, it was around the time of the French Revolution, and the French Revolution, sort of tied in with a lot of kind of Enlightenment ideals about the value of reason over emotion, and really prioritized reason and the idea of sort of logic rather than emotion. And perhaps she's suggesting that actually these also, or rather this emphasis on reason can also mislead people. And indeed, in the final two lines, she says, "Such the dubious ray that wavering reason lends in life's long darkling way." And so now she's saying that actually the dubious ray of wavering reason. So this is the kind of, well, dubious is an interesting word. It suggests that it's something that's not really sort of properly legitimate or valid or worthwhile. If it's a dubious ray, it's not necessarily to be trusted. That wavering reason lends in life's long darkling way. And so here she's saying that actually the idea of reason in life's long darkling way as a reason, as an approach to life, as a kind of method, if you like, of sort of navigating the sort of the difficulties in life, can actually perhaps be dubious, can be not the right way to act, and certainly wavering reason. This word wavering implies something inconstant, something that cannot necessarily again be trusted, and so perhaps she's arguing that actually we shouldn't overly rely on reason, and that the sort of the contrasting values of emotion are just as important. Lovely word here, darkling, life's long darkling way, sort of the suggestion that we face trials and tribulations in life, and we might look to reason as a way, or as a guide, but here she's saying that actually that might not be the right thing to do, because they also can be like these wandering fairy fires that misled the pilgrim and sort of led them astray. Notice as well, I highlighted here but I haven't actually commented on it yet, the alliteration in fairy fires, perhaps helping to create that sort of seductive tone. Fairy fires, these are the things that are going to mislead. So they have just a very quick look at Written Near a Port on a Dark Evening. As ever, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them in a comment underneath the video, and someone from the English department will try to answer any questions you have. All right, hope that was helpful.